The mainstream media has a bias against pro-lifers? No way. Yes, way. That's true. Hey, I'm Kristan Hawkins. Welcome to this episode of Explicitly Pro-Life. So today I just want to talk about bias in the media when it comes to reporting on the pro-life movement, the abortion issue. Anyone who's been paying attention in any kind of cable TV news or mainstream newspaper, we can tell you that there's definitely something going on. There's definitely a bias when it comes to reporting on abortion. And it's very clear, sadly, these days, where reporters stand on the issue of abortion. In fact, I was watching a clip from CNN from their morning show, Allison Camerado, their big anchor. She actually used to be at Fox, and I thought she was actually fairly conservative when she was at Fox, but now she's very liberal over at CNN. And she was, really grilling her guests just like 2 days ago on the issue of sexual assault and abortion. And also she was interviewing, I think it was the Indiana Attorney General, over the case that just went before the Supreme Court. And this was a case where the state of Indiana had banned abortions because of genetic disabilities or genetic differences. So Down syndrome, cystic fibrosis. So you couldn't have an abortion. The state of Indiana said you can't have an abortion if you're choosing to abort a child because of their genetic makeup or their gender. And the Supreme Court, I don't know if you all saw, but the Supreme Court kind of punted this decision, said, we're not going to take it up right now. We're going to let the Seventh Circuit standing, kind of stand for now until other states kind of weigh in. But they actually did uphold one part of the law that Indiana required required the abortion facilities within the state to actually cremate or bury all the aborted babies. And Allison Camerado on CNN was grilling the Attorney General, what are you going to do with all of these kids and let them be born? And so it was really I was watching it this morning when I was at the airport, and it was just so telling, this innate bias that's happening all around us every single day when it comes to reporting about abortion. So I want to talk about that today, and I think there's a lot we can discuss and we can dive into. But before we dive in too much into detail here, you probably noticed the background is a little different in this video. If you're subscribing on YouTube or watching this on Facebook, I'm actually been traveling a lot, very extensively in the past couple of months. And so I'm actually here at the Students for Life America national headquarters in Fredericksburg, Virginia. We have a large warehouse where we keep all of our vans, our trucks, all of our merchandise, all of the resources that we send out to pro-life students across the country, our events in the box, our postcards. If you have ever checked out the Students for Life store, if you haven't, make sure you do. But if you like one of the pieces of apparel, or if you have an idea for a piece of apparel, make sure you send me a direct message and I can shoot you a link to where you can get it, and probably a discount code. Apparently I have some sway here sometimes. So I wanted to make sure you're putting a plug for checking out the Students for Life merchandise and apparel. It's pretty amazing stuff, and it's fairly cheap too. And it's a great way for you as a pro-lifer, especially if you're just getting involved in the pro-life movement, to kind of start that conversation with friends and family. Because if you come to a family function wearing a pro-life t-shirt or having a pro-life bumper sticker in your car, you will stir up a discussion, especially in today's political environment. So it's a great way where you don't have to really start the discussion. Just wear a shirt saying, all lives matter, and then see where the discussion heads from there. Or my favorite is defund Planned Parenthood. I wear that one in airports a lot, and it's very interesting to see the looks I receive. Okay, so one thing before we get into this topic, another housekeeping item. I've been getting a lot of questions, folks emailing or messaging me, asking me how they can help, how they can get more involved with the podcast. One, keep sending me your ideas, suggestions for future topics that you would like to hear me talk about, have us explore together. But the other thing is, I want you to know, if you want to help out, make sure you're subscribing to the podcast on YouTube so you can be notified every week, every Thursday when we put up a new episode. Subscribe on Spotify or iTunes, wherever kind of you get your podcasts, and tell others to subscribe, other pro-lifers, and even other and friends and family who might be pro-choice. Because the point of Explicitly Pro-Life is to give you tools and resources to be able to talk about abortion, give you new things to think about when it comes to the kind of how abortion intersects with politics and culture, but also to kind of give a glimpse. I find that a lot of pro-choice, pro-abortion leaning students on young people on campuses, they're genuinely interested. If they're not a convicted leftist and they're intellectually honest, people are interested. They want to know, like, how can you believe this way about abortion? And so I'm actually hoping this podcast gives pro-choice, pro-abortion people kind of that insight of what are pro-lifers thinking, and how are we coming to of our beliefs and the decisions we make. So I definitely want to make sure you guys are subscribing, and you're also telling others to subscribe, because that would really help us get the word out and spread the message. And it's a really easy way for you to get involved and just starting that conversation. Okay, so let's start talking about media bias. It's everywhere these days. I mean, obviously, in the age of Donald Trump, I don't know if you've noticed, I barely watch cable news now. And I used to be a cable news junkie. I would have it on all the time I was working. I'd watch clips. Ever since President Trump was elected president, I just can't stand to watch it. It's all the time. It's always about Trump all the time. I mean, the president must love it because he loves it when people talk about him, but that's all they do. And I get so bored of the stories over and over again. And I also found that, since President Trump has been elected, it's almost gotten, especially in the cable news front, and even now in the mainstream newspapers, the press aren't even hiding the fact they're openly hostile towards the president, towards his administration, and towards conservatives in general. It's almost like there isn't really like that unbiased journalist. There's the thing that journalists are supposed to go to school for, right? Just report the story, not comment on the story. That's almost like it doesn't exist anymore. Everyone has a side, which actually makes it really difficult when you're trying to kind of sift through the news and figure out what the hell actually happened. It makes it difficult because you have to know whose piece are you reading and what have they been tweeting. You actually have to go to reporters' Twitter feeds to figure out where do they lean. Can I actually trust this information, or what sort of bias does this person have? So it's gotten really bad. So the first kind of example of innate bias against pro-lifers that I've seen recently is a story that Students for Life is reporting, because it actually happened to us. So last October, we were contacted by CNN. It was called The United Shades of America. This is a comedian who has a show on CNN. Listen, I don't watch it, but I have seen clips of it. Kamau Bell. And he has a show, United Shades of America, and they contacted us because they wanted to do a story of abortion politics in the United States. They wanted to do it in Mississippi, because Mississippi's got one abortion facility left. In the past, a lot of attention has been put on Mississippi, the fact that they have one remaining abortion facility. We actually have a team member, Elizabeth Parker, who's from Mississippi. So Elizabeth is our Appalachian Regional Coordinator, and she's also our Minority Outreach Coordinator. So she spends a lot of time on HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities down the South. So we flew Elizabeth down to Mississippi because she's currently living in Nashville. Matt, our National Director of Communications, he flew from Fredericksburg, Virginia, down to Mississippi to do the interview. And this was supposed to be all about abortion politics. So Elizabeth was interviewed. We were told it was, it went really well. They appreciated our time. We paid to have our staff down there, paid for their hotel, their time that they lost. The episode finally aired, and not surprisingly, all of Elizabeth's interview was cut out of this episode. They briefly showed on cable TV. It briefly showed her, and also showed a clip of me talking on Tucker Carlson. But no pro-life voices were actually represented on the show. Zero. Absolutely none. The only people that were allowed to have their voices heard on the show were, as you can probably guess, pro-choice, pro-abortion people. I mean, Elizabeth is an amazing person to talk to because she has such a unique story. She's an African-American woman. She grew up there in Mississippi in the South. Her parents are ministers. They run a pro-life pregnancy resource center. She's on college campuses every day talking to young people about abortion. And yet CNN found nothing in her comments worthy of airing. It was unbelievable. The only time you actually kind of saw pro-lifers in person was when Kamau Bell was actually in front of he was in front of an abortion facility. I'm not sure if it was a Planned Parenthood, and people were praying in front of the abortion facility, and he was cussing and swearing and being explicit about their presence. Now, if you went to CNN's website after the show, there's an 11.5-minute clip that's longer that does feature a pro-life doctor and 2 minutes and 5 seconds of Elizabeth's interview. That's it. That's all they aired. CNN literally did an entire show about abortion politics in our country and didn't show any interviews of pro-life people. Yeah, that's what happened. One thing that you all probably saw and that I get irate about every year is the March for Life. Every year at the March for Life, it is like the pro-life movement dresses all in black, and we kind of stealthily go up Constitution Avenue as like secret ninjas. That's essentially like what happens if you're paying attention to mainstream press of the March for Life, because every year it's like we weren't there. Or my favorite is when you'll have like a Washington Post headline. There'll be one picture of a pro-abortion woman holding a blue "Keep Abortion Legal" sign, and there'll be one picture of a pro-lifer. A lot of times it's a white older male, and the headline will be like anti-abortion and abortion rights supporters clash in Washington, D.C. Which, first of all, that's not a clash. When there's like 30 protesters that show up to protest the March for Life and there's 500,000 pro-lifers, that's not a clash. Also, it's always interesting. They'll say anti-abortion to describe us, pro-lifers, which I have no problem being called anti-abortion. In fact, we should probably do a whole episode on that later. But we're anti-abortion and they're pro-abortion. They're pro-reproductive rights or abortion rights supporters. It's fascinating how they kind of just try to make the two sides seem. But every year our coverage is terrible. Every once in a while we'll get a good picture in the New York Times or the Washington Post. Usually the article is pretty bad, but the pictures can be good. At Students for Life, we've been really strategic of getting pro-life, young, joyful faces to the Supreme Court. In fact, while the March for Life is going on, the rally's going on, we always have a team of students at the Supreme Court doing media interviews, making sure anytime a reporter is trying to take a picture of a pro-abortion protester, that there is a young, joyful face in the background holding an "I am the pro-life generation" sign. That is why you see that "I am the pro-life generation" sign all over anytime abortion's talked about in any newspaper, and B-roll that's used on an evening news when they're talking about an issue. You'll see probably 8 out of 10 times it's going to be one of our students, because we've been there so many times at the Supreme Court. And really that's important for us because it's narrative shifting. We've seen over the course of 10, 11, 12 years the difference between how the media like to portray us before Students for Life got on the scene and now after. And it's been a significant shift, and it's been an important shift. But every year the coverage is pretty abysmal. This year, I remember after the March for Life, I was sitting in a Bistro Italiano. Well, it used to be Bistro Italiano. Now they changed the name. It's like Mexican/Italian. It sounds good. It's on Capitol Hill. I used to go there all the time when I worked on Capitol Hill. We were about ready to pass out. We sat down, they had the news playing, and they kept going on and on and on about the Women's March, which was being held the day after the March for Life. It was like a 6 or 7 minute segment, and then they devoted 12 seconds to the March for Life that had just happened, had 500,000 people, way more people than the Women's March this year. I was irate when I saw it. In fact, Media Research Center is a really great resource to go to. Every year, they actually will track and report on media coverage of the March for Life. So this year, MRC, they said that the Women's March, which happened the day after the March for Life, which was significantly smaller than the actual March for Life, the world's largest social mobilization. Just a little talking point. No other cause, no other movement in the history of the world turns out more people every single year than the American March for Life. No other cause. It's us. But MRC said this year that the Women's March fetched 14 minutes and 26 seconds of coverage on ABC, CBS, NBC morning and evening newscasts. The March for Life this year got 58 seconds. It's unbelievable. In 2017, so right after President Trump was elected, women across the country were going to march against, President Trump, and they were forming this Women's March. And so it got a lot of coverage. And there's a whole story there I want to tell you on that, but I won't. It's a long story. But so there was all this coverage to this Women's March being planned in reaction to the swearing in of President Trump. So they planned it the Saturday after his inauguration. And President Trump very smartly said, turn the tables on the reporters when they kept saying, well, what about this Women's March? How do you feel about it? He kept saying, what are you doing with the March for Life? Have you covered the March for Life? It's happening that, right before or right after the March for Life. And so President Trump actually helped the pro-life movement gain significant amounts of coverage in 2017. But even that year, which I would say in my 13 years of Students for Life of measuring earned media coverage. So how many times the March for Life is written about and covered. In my 13 years, that year, 2017, was the most the March for Life had ever been covered. The Women's March still got 3 times more coverage than the March for Life, even with President Trump issuing the ultimatum. And that day was crazy. I remember I had like 3 TV interviews. Every national pro-life leader was on TV. It was crazy. But even that year I saw it because I was doing a live shot for, I believe it was ABC or CBS, their daytime news program, and it was right when the mass at the Verizon Center was getting out. The March for Life really hadn't started, and they were kind of on the grassy part. And that was the first year that Vice President Pence came. And so it was crazy. There was always backlogs because people had to come through security. So a lot of people never even got into the actual rally area. They were actually stuck in Constitution Avenue because Secret Service had shut down. So it looked like, at one angle, there weren't that many people, but actually there were hundreds of thousands of people lined up on Constitution Avenue, never got in. And the anchor, the man who interviewed me was like, oh, looks like there are about 10,000 people here. And I was like, what are you talking about? There's hundreds of thousands of people. They're right in the street. So yeah, we're seeing this. We see this every year. So I would encourage you, check out the Media Research Center this coming January to see what the coverage is like. It's abysmal every single year. And not only do we get back bad coverage, we don't have coverage. It's like I said, we're like those stealth ninjas that no one can see coming. We just make sure that whatever, all the cell phone towers in Washington, D.C. go down because there's so many people on their phone that day. No one can get a text message out, but we weren't there. But not only do we not get coverage, the other thing that we face in the pro-life movement is when we do get coverage, it's downgraded, it's downplayed, right? So major publications routinely will refer to the crowd that's gathered at the March for Life as thousands. So, I've got a list here our team put together, New York Times, a headline, thousands march in Washington, an annual anti-abortion rally. Associated Press, thousands of people across the country brave the cold to attend the event. Washington Post, largest annual anti-abortion event, draw thousands of protesters. NBC, thousands descend upon Washington. This is crazy. They keep saying thousands, but it's actually hundreds of thousands. It's hundreds of thousands, not thousands. This is why words matter. It's fascinating how they just leave this out, and when you look at the media coverage from this year's March for Life, the March for Life got 58 seconds compared to 14 minutes and 26 seconds of the Women's March. Yet The day after the Women's March, the media promoted this story, started by the Washington Post about the Covington Catholic high school kids. This wall was one originally, this one white boy in a Make America Great hat. Suddenly that got tons of media coverage because for an entire day and a half, America was led to believe that this white kid who was Catholic wearing a MAGA hat was there for the March for Life, was harassing Native American elders, which was not the case, was totally proved false, and now Washington Post and others have libel lawsuits on their hands, and hopefully they'll lose. Maybe these biased journalists will be held to some journalistic standards in the future. But that's what got the coverage at the March for Life. That's what got the coverage, and I think it was very harmful to the March for Life's brand of that is what was promoted, and most people, even though the story was proved to be completely false, to be made up, that was a total setup by that professional protester, Nathan Phillips, that's what most people still remember. They don't remember it was a setup. All they remember is that it happened. That's all they remember. And that is why the lawsuit, I think, is so significant because, the young boy, his parents realize, Nick Salmon's parents realize, no matter where he goes in life, he's going to be remembered for that, even though it was proved to be totally an inaccurate account. The other thing I want to talk about when we're dealing with mainstream media, and I kind of had hidden that earlier, talking about how the other side uses words strategically, right? So, anti-abortion and then abortion rights supporters. What sounds better, right? Anti or somebody who's for a right. Thousands, the use of thousands instead of hundreds of thousands. An NPR memo just was released about a week ago, I believe, where NPR was reminding its reporters how they should cover abortion and what words they need to use when they're covering abortion. So I've got some quotes here. So they said, when they're referring to fetal heartbeat laws, so abortion bans that ban abortion after a child has been scientifically proven to have a heartbeat, they said that they should only say that fetal heartbeat if it's in quotations. They said partial birth abortion is not a medical term, that to use late term abortion. And by the way, it is also not correct to call these procedures rare. The one good thing I liked about this was they said, well, it's not correct to call these late-term abortions rare because we don't know how often they perform, which I was actually pretty grateful that they said that because it is true. The abortion industry likes to say that late-term abortions are rare. We call them heart attack abortions, and I would encourage you all to use that language, heart attack abortions. Partial birth abortions aren't really done anymore. The Supreme Court upheld a ruling saying those should be illegal. But how they commit these late-term abortions now are they insert digoxin into the heart of a child, and digoxin induces cardiac arrest, a heart attack, and the child dies of a heart attack inside the mother's womb, and then 2 days later, the mother gives birth to a dead child. So that's, I think, how we should be describing. I think it's really important. People get really mad. Students get really mad on college campuses when I say heart attack abortion instead of late-term abortion, just abortion. Why? Because no one wants to know what the hell happens during an abortion. So NPR is reminding their yeah, I'm reading this quote. I'm sorry, NPR, I'm doing this wrong. Let me read this whole quote so I don't mess this up. Partial birth is not a medical term and has no exact parallel in medical terminology. Intact dilation and extraction, D&E, we call them D&E abortions, late-term abortions, is the closest description. Also, it's not correct to call these procedures rare. It is not known how often they're performed. Okay, that's a good thing. Nor is it accurate to use the phrase late-term abortion. Though we initially believed this term carried less ideological baggage when compared with partial birth, it still conveys the sense that the fetus is viable when the abortion is performed. The fetus is viable. When these abortions are being committed in the third trimester, the child can live outside of the womb. Even at the end of the second trimester, the child can live outside the womb. But it's fascinating, this NPR carried less ideological baggage. The memo also stated NPR doesn't use the term abortion clinics. Instead, we say medical or health clinics that perform abortions. The point is not to use abortion before the word clinic because these clinics perform other procedures, not just abortions. Then there is guidance about referring to the Unborn Victims of Violence Act. The actual quote from the NPR, and I actually started this memo, said, "Babies are not babies until they're born. They're fetuses." Incorrectly calling a fetus a baby or the unborn is part of the strategy used by anti-abortion groups to shift language, legality, public opinion. Only you can say unborn, you put it in quotations, or if you're referring to the law. The most neutral language to refer to the death of fetus during a crime is fetal homicide. You can't refer to a baby. Now, we have baby showers all across America, right? Every woman who is pregnant, who has family, who loves and support her, has a baby shower. No one has fetus showers. When women miscarry, when women go through the pain and trauma of miscarriages, no one ever says, "Oh, I'm so sorry you lost your fetus." No one ever says that. We say, "We're so sorry you lost your baby." Because every single person, no matter how you line up on abortion, every single person recognizes that what is inside of her and growing is a unique, whole, living human being. That is why my children, when they see fetal models in my office, say baby. They look at the fetal models in my office of fetuses, and they recognize that the human child that is developing, that's growing, is in fact a baby. Duh. And it's so crazy because you think about it, is children innately understand that's a baby. Then they have to be convinced in high school and college that it's not a baby, never to use that word. Why? Because we have to dehumanize that child in order to accept the premise of abortion, in order to be okay with a pro-abortion stance, to be in favor of legal abortion. You have to dehumanize the other person. You have to make that person not seem like you. This is exactly what happened if you look in the 1930s and 1920s in Germany, right? Before the Holocaust, before the mass prosecution and extermination of Jews, what happened? It was all messaging. Dehumanization of the Jewish people in Germany when German citizens were told that Jews weren't real persons, or they were like cockroaches, right? That's what happened in the Rwandan genocide, right? A whole group of people were labeled cockroaches. What we do today in America is, instead of calling it baby, we say fetus. Fetus is just like saying somebody is a cockroach. Now, the funny thing is, fetus actually isn't a bad word neatly. Fetus is Latin for young one. It's just a stage of development, right? You didn't come from a fetus. You didn't come from a zygote. You once were one. You once were a zygote. You once were an embryo. You once were a fetus, just like how you once were a newborn and you once were a toddler. These are just stages in a human person's development. So it's very interesting to see how the left has purposely used this, not a bad term, fetus, to dehumanize a whole group of people and to justify their behavior. So, this goes, the last part of the NPR article talks about, we should use abortion rights supporter, abortion rights opponents. It's acceptable to use the phrase anti-abortion rights, but do not use the term pro-abortion rights. Well, why the hell not? If abortion is so good, if abortion is this right that frees women, that gives women the freedom to do whatever they want, to live the lives that they see fit, that gives them autonomy, that makes them equal to men, then why the hell not say you're pro-abortion? Why is it that over and over again we hear from the left, we hear from abortion supporters that they hate that term? Why is NPR telling their own journalists not to use the term pro-abortion? Why is it? If you love abortion, if you think abortion is so awesome, is so freeing, is what gives women the ability to live their lives, then why not be pro-abortion? Why not be pro-abortion? Just own it. I hate that. We see this all the time on college campuses where people will say, "I'm not pro-abortion, I'm pro-choice." You kept saying pro-abortion in your speech. And often when I'm speaking publicly, I'll interchange pro-choice with pro-life. pro-choice with pro-abortion. And I do that purposely because I think they're the same. I know people who are pro-abortion rights like to think of themselves as pro-choice, and they refer to themselves as pro-choice. But what they really are is pro-abortion. And that makes people so mad. It makes young people so mad when they hear me say pro-abortion. And my challenge is over and over again, well, what are you? I'm anti-abortion. I am proudly anti-abortion. I don't care if the media calls me anti-abortion. Why? Because I know 53% of Americans, their top of mind response when they hear the word abortion is death, killing, sadness. Those are the first three words that Americans hear in their head when they hear the word abortion. There's innately, as human beings, we know there's something wrong when we hear the word abortion. That's why the efforts for shout your abortion and whatever never really go far, because innately we know there's something wrong with abortion. So if I'm anti-abortion and I'm willing to accept being called anti-abortion, then why aren't you pro-abortion? Because I'm anti-legal abortion, so you're pro-legal abortion. And they get very angry. They get very upset because no one wants to call themselves pro-abortion. They want to be able to say, I'm pro-choice. I wouldn't personally have an abortion, but I wouldn't tell someone else not to have an abortion. It doesn't work like that. Abortion isn't like this gray issue. It's a black and white issue. It's a moral issue. No one can be pro-choice on harming children, on child abuse. Well, I personally wouldn't abuse my child. But hey, if you want to do it in the privacy of your home, that's your choice. No one would ever say that that's an acceptable moral position to be in. No one would ever say, oh, well, I would never own slaves, and I think it's wrong to own slaves. But hey, if you want to own other human beings and oppress them, that's your choice. No one would ever dare say that that's the acceptable moral position. So why is it on abortion that we allow those on the other side to call themselves pro-choice? They're not. You're either pro-abortion or you're anti-abortion. Pick a damn side. And if you want to be a pro-abortion, fine. Then be prepared to defend it. Be prepared to defend it. Be prepared to talk about it. But own the term. Own up to what you are. Don't hide behind pro-choice. Don't hide behind it. So, that's what we saw this NPR memo. I got so angry when I saw that because, they actually said, do not use the term pro-abortion rights. I know the reason why they don't want to use that term is because no one likes to say that they're pro-abortion. No one likes to say that they're pro-abortion. I think Alyssa Milano, not too long ago on CNN, when she was calling for her sex strike, which, by the way, my husband, I think he said he thinks she's married. I wonder how that's going. Good luck for your sex strike, Alyssa Milano. I don't think the people of Georgia really care. But she said, no one's pro-abortion. We're all pro-life. No, you're either pro-legal abortion or you're anti-legal abortion. You can choose. You can choose what side you're on. But you have to pick a side. And we need, as pro-lifers, I think we need to do a better job of forcing those who call themselves pro-choice to actually have to own up to what they are. I think it's actually pretty significant when someone has to own that term, when someone has to go from saying pro-choice to pro-life. I think it's significant. I think it does something inside of them. It gets those wheels start spinning because somehow we've let pro-choice become the moral high ground in this argument. And it's not. It's the coward. It's the cowardly ground to take because we would never accept pro-choice on any other human rights atrocity in our world. We would never accept it. So that's a little bit of, that's just some recent examples of media bias. There's been some good things. The Washington Post, which is owned by a mega Democratic pro-abortion, donor, just gave Leanna Wen, the new president of Planned Parenthood, 4 Pinocchios for lying and saying thousands of women died before Roe, which if you listen to my second episode, I did a whole episode on life before Roe, and I actually dispelled those myths. The Washington Post actually used the exact same sources that I did to dispel the myths. So there are some good things that come out. Every once in a while, things kind of leak that come out that I think the abortion industry doesn't really know. The mainstream news doesn't really know that they're not helping the abortion industry. I think, for example, Alyssa Milano's sex strike is a great thing that's helping the pro-life movement. I think it's a great thing because that's what we've been calling for. It's called abstinence. If you're not ready to have a baby with another human being, then maybe you shouldn't have sex with them. It's actually pretty logical. I know it's a hard concept for people to understand, but it's actually pretty straightforward and pretty damn easy. So that's it for this episode of Explicitly Pro-Life. I hope you enjoyed it. Make sure you subscribe on iTunes, on Spotify, on YouTube, and make sure you share this podcast with friends, family members. Get the conversation started. Remember, direct message me if you have ideas for and topics for shows that you'd like to see in the future. Thanks, guys.